Catherine Foster stood motionless by the large bay window, watching raindrops race down the glass like tiny rivers seeking escape. The text message on her phone glowed with an unusual invitation. Both her sons wanted to take her to dinner, tonight. 3 months after Edward's funeral, they suddenly remembered she existed. Something wasn't right. The sprawling colonial home felt emptier with each passing day since Edward's heart attack. 40 years of marriage ended in an ambulance siren and a hospital waiting room. Now, at 58, Catherine found herself navigating widowhood in a house built for a family that had long since scattered. Michael lived across town, but visited only on major holidays. James had moved to Boston 5 years ago and communicated primarily through brief text messages on her birthday and Mother's Day. Catherine tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and sighed. The silence in the house pressed against her eardrums. Edward's reading glasses still sat on his nightstand, untouched since that terrible night. She hadn't been able to put them away. Sometimes she'd pick them up, feeling the weight of them in her palm, remembering how he'd pushed them up on his nose when concentrating on the morning crossword. "I should at least hear what they have to say," she whispered to herself, surprised by the sound of her own voice in the empty house. She dressed carefully in a navy dress Edward had always complimented, added her pearl necklace, and applied subtle makeup. The woman in the mirror looked composed, elegant even, though her green eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before the funeral. Catherine grabbed her purse and car keys, wondering what exactly had prompted this sudden family reunion. The restaurant was upscale. Michael's choice, no doubt. Catherine spotted them immediately. Michael and his wife Rebecca at a corner table, James beside them with his wife Diane. They were deep in conversation, but stopped abruptly when they noticed her approaching. 4 faces arranged themselves into expressions of concern so quickly it was almost comical. "Mom!" Michael stood, kissing her cheek. "You look great. We were just talking about you," James added, pulling out her chair. Rebecca reached across the table to squeeze Catherine's hand. "We've been so worried, living in that big house all alone." Catherine smiled politely. "The house is fine. I'm fine. This is a nice surprise, though. What's the occasion?" The 4 exchanged glances, a silent communication that excluded her completely. "Mom," Michael began, his voice taking on the patient tone he used with difficult clients, "we've been talking, and we're concerned about you." "All that space to manage," Diane added. "The stairs, the yard work, the property taxes," James said, then quickly added, "which must be such a burden for you now." Catherine sipped her water, watching them over the rim of her glass. So that's what this was about. The house, worth well over $1 million in the current market. And likely her investments, too. Edward had left everything to her, including his life insurance policy. All told, her net worth approached $2 million. "We found a wonderful place," Rebecca said, her smile too bright. "Sunrise Senior Village. It's brand new, has amazing amenities, like living in a resort. You'd have your own apartment," Michael continued, "but with staff available 24/7. No more worrying about maintenance or cooking if you don't want to. And a built-in community," James added. "People your own age." Catherine's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "My own age? I'm 58, not 88. Rebecca laughed, a tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, but it's for active adults 55 plus. You'll love it. Every Wednesday and Sunday they have bingo." The conversation continued around her as they detailed the many virtues of Sunrise Senior Village. Catherine remained quiet, observing how they'd clearly rehearsed this pitch. Michael mentioned he'd already spoken to a real estate agent who thought her house could sell quickly. James had researched the financial details of the senior community. They'd even scheduled a tour for next week. "And what about my investments?" Catherine asked finally. Michael leaned forward eagerly. "I've been thinking about that, too. The portfolio Dad set up is too conservative. I could easily increase your returns with some more aggressive strategies." "We just want what's best for you, Mom," James said, reaching for her hand. We worry about you alone in that house." As the evening progressed, Catherine pieced together the full extent of their plan. They'd sell her house, move her into the senior living facility, and Michael would manage her investments. The proceeds from the house sale would cover the substantial entrance fee for Sunrise Village, with plenty left over for her care. Or so they claimed. What they didn't know was that Catherine had spent 20 years as Edward's bookkeeper in their successful engineering firm before they sold it. She understood money, investments, and property values far better than they realized. She also understood what wasn't being said. With her safely installed in a senior facility, they'd have effective control over her assets. Assets they clearly saw as their future inheritance. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice measured. "It's quite a lot to consider." The relief around the table was palpable. They thought she was acquiescing. Michael ordered champagne to celebrate what he called new beginnings. As they clinked glasses, Catherine smiled and sipped, but her mind was already calculating. Edward had taught her to play chess, emphasizing the importance of thinking several moves ahead. She would need to be strategic, patient. This game had just begun. Later that night, alone in her bedroom, Catherine opened her laptop and began to research. Not senior living communities, but something else entirely. How to move assets, where they couldn't be traced or accessed without her explicit permission. By dawn, she had the beginnings of a plan. The following morning, Catherine called her old friend Maggie, the one person she trusted implicitly. "They want to put me in a home, Mags," she said when they met for coffee. "They've already picked out the place, talked to realtors about selling my house. Michael wants control of my investments." Maggie's expression darkened. "Those ungrateful little... What are you going to do?" Catherine's lips curved into a small smile. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want. Or rather, what they think they want." For the next month, Catherine played the role of the confused widow perfectly. She asked questions about Sunrise Village, expressed interest in Michael's investment strategies, and even toured the facility with appropriate enthusiasm. Rebecca seemed particularly pleased when Catherine admired the bingo hall. Behind the scenes, however, Catherine was systematically liquidating her assets. She met with her own financial advisor, not Michael, and converted a significant portion of her investments to cash. She consulted a real estate attorney about selling her house. She even spoke with an insurance specialist about her options regarding Edward's life insurance policy. "You're sure about this?" her financial advisor asked, concerned about the unusual requests. "Edward and I built this nest egg together," Catherine replied firmly. "I'm merely ensuring it goes where we would have wanted." At home, she began sorting through belongings, ostensibly preparing for downsizing. She gave Maggie several precious items for safekeeping, things with sentimental rather than monetary value that she couldn't bear to lose. The rest she photographed and cataloged, then stored the inventory in a secure online account. Catherine also visited Sarah at the travel agency where she and Edward had booked their honeymoon 36 years earlier. "I'm interested in revisiting some special memories," she explained, browsing brochures for European destinations. 6 weeks after the initial dinner, Catherine invited her sons to her home. They arrived with their wives, barely concealing their eagerness. Michael carried a folder of documents, power of attorney forms, she suspected, and perhaps paperwork for listing her house. "I've been thinking about your suggestions," Catherine began once they were seated in the living room, "about selling the house and moving to Sunrise Village." "That's wonderful, Mom," James said, exchanging glances with his brother. "And I've made some decisions," she continued. "You were right. This house is too big for just me." Michael nodded encouragingly. "The market is hot right now. My realtor friend thinks we could get 1.2 million, possibly more with a bidding war." "Actually," Catherine said calmly, "I've already sold it." Silence fell over the room. 4 pairs of eyes stared at her in shock. "You... what?" Michael managed finally. "Sold it. The closing was last week. I accepted an offer of 1.4 million. Catherine smiled. "The new owners take possession next month." Rebecca recovered first. But where will you live? Sunrise Village has a waiting list unless you put down a deposit, which we were going to help with after the house sold. That's very thoughtful, Catherine replied, but I won't be moving to Sunrise Village. Michael's face had turned an interesting shade of red. Mom, we discussed this. You need a safe place with people to look after you. Catherine regarded her elder son steadily. No, Michael, you decided I needed that. I never agreed. Then where will you go? James demanded, his voice rising slightly. You can't just sell your house without a plan. I have a plan, Catherine said. I've had one for weeks. I just didn't share it with you. She reached for her purse and withdrew a small object that looked like a thumb drive. Do you know what this is? Michael frowned. A flash drive? Close. It's what they call a cold wallet, for cryptocurrency. Catherine turned it over in her fingers. Bitcoin, specifically. I've been learning quite a bit about digital currency recently. Diane laughed nervously. Mom, that stuff is complicated and risky. You should stick with traditional investments. Like the aggressive strategies Michael suggested? Catherine raised an eyebrow. I did some research on those too. They would have given him control over my accounts while generating substantial fees for his firm. Quite clever. The atmosphere in the room chilled considerably. Catherine continued, her voice level. I've liquidated most of my assets. The house, Edward's life insurance policy, our investment portfolio. Approximately 30% has gone to several charities Edward and I always supported. The rest, she held up the cold wallet. The rest is here, completely secure and accessible only to me. Michael stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly understand what you're doing. Dad would never have wanted— Your father, Catherine interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time, taught me everything about our finances. We made every decision together for 40 years. He would be appalled by what you're trying to do. James leaned forward, his expression suddenly conciliatory. Mom, we're just worried about you. All that money, you could be taken advantage of? Yes, Catherine agreed. I could be. That's exactly why I've protected myself. Rebecca's face had hardened into a mask of barely contained fury. So you've given away our— She caught herself. You've given away money to strangers instead of securing your future. My future is secure, Catherine replied. I've purchased a lovely apartment in Florence, Italy. Edward and I honeymooned there, and we always plan to return. Now I will, alone, but with his memory. The room erupted in protests and accusations. Catherine sat calmly through the storm, observing her children as they revealed their true priorities with every word. Not once did they ask if this plan would make her happy. Not once did they acknowledge her right to choose her own path. They spoke only of money, money they had counted as theirs before it was even theirs to count. When they finally exhausted themselves, Catherine stood. I think it's time for you to leave. This isn't over, Michael warned, gathering his now useless documents. Actually, it is, Catherine replied. Completely over. After they stormed out, Catherine sat in the quiet house, feeling strangely peaceful. She picked up a framed photo of Edward from the side table. You were right about them, she whispered to his smiling image. But I've fixed it now. She glanced at her watch. In 3 weeks, she would board a plane with a one-way ticket. She had already enrolled in Italian language classes and connected with an expat community in Florence. At 58, Catherine Foster was about to begin an entirely new chapter, one her children had inadvertently made possible by showing her exactly who they were and who she didn't want to become. Tomorrow, she would have coffee with Maggie and tell her everything. Tonight, she would sleep soundly for the first time since Edward died, secure in the knowledge that she had taken back control of her life. The rain pattered against the windows of Maggie's cozy kitchen as Catherine sipped her coffee the next morning. Maggie Wilson had been her confidant since college, the one person who had remained constant through marriage, children, career changes, and now widowhood. Unlike Catherine's carefully styled auburn waves, Maggie's silver hair was cut in a practical bob that suited her no-nonsense personality. "You should have seen their faces, Mags," Catherine said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Michael looked like he was about to have a stroke. Maggie's hearty laugh filled the kitchen. "Serves them right. I always thought those boys were spoiled, even when they were little. Edward was too generous with them." Catherine sighed. "He wanted to give them everything he never had growing up. I understood it, but I worried they'd never learn to stand on their own." "Well, they're standing now, on their own 2 greedy feet." Maggie refilled their cups. "Tell me more about Florence. Are you really going through with it?" Catherine's eyes lit up as she reached into her purse and withdrew a folder containing printouts of a sunlit apartment overlooking a picturesque Italian street. "I've already put down a deposit. It's in the Oltrarno district, across the river from the main tourist areas. 2 bedrooms, a small terrace with a view of the hills. Edward and I stayed nearby on our honeymoon." "It's beautiful," Maggie said, examining the photos. "But aren't you scared? Moving to another country at our age, not speaking the language?" "Terrified," Catherine admitted, "but also exhilarated. For 36 years, my identity was wrapped up in being Edward's wife and Michael and James's mother. Even at the firm, I was always Edward's wife who does the books. Now, I can just be me." She paused, considering. "Though I'm not entirely sure who that is anymore." "That's the adventure, isn't it?" Maggie squeezed her hand. "Finding out." Catherine nodded, but her expression grew serious. "There's something else I need to ask you. Something important. Anything. I need you to be my emergency contact here, and I need you to hold something for me." Catherine reached into her purse again and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This contains a copy of my will, the password to my secure email account, and instructions for accessing a portion of my assets that aren't in cryptocurrency." Maggie took the envelope with appropriate solemnity. "You're really not telling the boys where you're going, are you?" "They'll know I'm in Italy. That much I've told them. But they won't have my address or phone number." Catherine's jaw tightened. "They'll have to demonstrate genuine concern for my well-being, not just my bank account, before I let them back into my life." Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Catherine glanced at the screen and grimaced. "Speaking of which, that's Michael. 3rd call this morning. You going to answer?" "Not yet. Let him stew a bit longer." As if on cue, a text message appeared. "Mom, we need to talk. What you're doing is dangerous and irrational. Please call me." A second message followed quickly. "I've spoken with Aunt Helen. She agrees you're not thinking clearly. Grief does strange things to people." Catherine showed the messages to Maggie, who rolled her eyes. "Helen? Your sister who lives in Phoenix and hasn't visited in 5 years? That's their expert on your mental state?" "Apparently." Catherine turned off her phone. "They're building a case that I'm incompetent. Classic move to gain control of someone's finances. Can they do that?" "They can try." Catherine smiled grimly. "But I've already had a complete cognitive assessment done by Dr. Eleanor Phillips. It's part of my documentation. Perfect score. They've underestimated me at every turn, Mags. They still see me as just their technologically challenged mother who needs their protection." The 2 women spent the afternoon reminiscing and finalizing Catherine's preparations. Maggie agreed to drive her to the airport when the day came and to keep their plans secret. As evening approached, Catherine reluctantly turned her phone back on to call for a rideshare service. 27 missed calls and messages awaited her. "I should deal with this," she sighed. "Better now than later." She called Michael first, putting the phone on speaker so Maggie could listen. "Mom!" His voice was strained. "Where have you been? We've been worried sick." "I've been having coffee with Maggie, Michael. There's no need for concern." "No need? You drop a bombshell about selling the house and running away to Italy with all your money converted to some internet currency scam, and there's no need for concern?" His voice rose with each word. Catherine kept her tone measured. "I'm not running away. I'm moving to a place I've always loved, at a time in my life when I'm free to do so. As for my financial decisions, they're exactly that, mine. Mom, You don't understand what you're doing. Bitcoin is volatile and risky. And living alone in a foreign country at your age, at my age, Catherine interrupted. Michael, I'm 58, not 88. Your father and I ran a successful engineering firm for 20 years. I handled all the bookkeeping, taxes, and investments. I think I can manage a move to Italy. Neat, but what if something happens to you there? What if you get sick or... I've arranged for comprehensive international health insurance. I've researched the Italian healthcare system, which, by the way, ranks considerably higher than ours. I've joined expat groups and made connections with Americans already living in Florence. The line went quiet for a moment. When Michael spoke again, his voice had a different quality. Softer, more wounded. Why didn't you talk to us before making these decisions? Don't you trust us at all? Catherine felt a momentary pang of doubt. Was she being too harsh? Then she remembered the eager way they'd planned to take over her life, the condescending explanations of what was best for her, the calculations in their eyes when they discussed her assets. Trust works both ways, Michael. You and James decided what should happen to me and my home without any real input from me. You planned my future around a bingo hall in a retirement community, when you know I've never played bingo in my life. That was just an example of the activities. You went to realtors about selling my house before even discussing it with me. You prepared power of attorney documents without my knowledge. So no, Michael, in financial matters, I don't trust you or your brother right now. Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was cold. I see. Well, when this cryptocurrency scheme collapses and you lose everything, don't come crying to us. The call ended abruptly. Catherine stared at the phone, her hand trembling slightly. You okay? Maggie asked gently. Not really, Catherine admitted, but I will be. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Catherine systematically sorted through 40 years of accumulated possessions, deciding what to ship to Italy, what to sell, and what to give away. The task proved both physically and emotionally exhausting. Each item carried memories. The crystal vase from her mother, now gone 15 years, the collection of seashells from family beach vacations when the boys were small, Edward's beloved books on architecture and engineering. Michael and James made several more attempts to reason with her. Each conversation followed the same pattern: initial concern, thinly veiled accusations of mental instability, and finally, anger, when she remained firm. Rebecca and Diane stopped by separately, each trying a softer approach, reminiscing about family holidays and suggesting that Catherine's grandchildren, though neither couple had children yet, would miss having their grandmother nearby. That's emotional manipulation, Sarah, the travel agent, remarked when Catherine recounted these visits during her final travel arrangements. My mother pulled the same thing when I divorced Tom. Think of the grandchildren, she said. I didn't even have kids. Catherine liked Sarah immediately. At 42, the travel agent had a warmth and efficiency that made the complicated logistics of an international move seem manageable. She'd gone through a difficult divorce 5 years earlier and rebuilt her life on her own terms, something Catherine found both relevant and inspiring. It's strange, Catherine confessed, as they finalized her flight details. I feel guilty, even though I know I shouldn't, like I'm abandoning them. Sarah looked up from her computer. From what you've told me, they were planning to put you in a glorified nursing home and take control of your money. Doesn't sound like you're the one doing the abandoning. You're right, but they're still my children. And they always will be, Sarah said. But that doesn't mean they get to control your life. 1 week before her departure, Catherine invited her sons to the house one last time. She had deliberately scheduled the meeting for when their wives would be at work, hoping for a more genuine conversation without their influence. The house was mostly packed now, with labeled boxes stacked in the living room and most of the furniture sold or donated. James arrived first, looking uncomfortable in the half-empty house. Wow, you're really doing this, Catherine nodded. The movers come for the shipping containers tomorrow. The new owners take possession next week. Michael arrived moments later, his expression carefully neutral. You wanted to see us? Yes. Please, sit. Catherine gestured to the remaining furniture, 3 kitchen chairs arranged in the living room. I wanted a chance to talk before I leave. About your will? Michael asked bluntly. Catherine gave him a measured look. No, Michael. About our family. For the next hour, Catherine spoke from her heart. She talked about her life with Edward, the dreams they'd shared, the pride they'd felt watching their sons grow up. She acknowledged her own mistakes in parenting. Perhaps they'd given too much, protected too fiercely, failed to teach the harder lessons about earning one's way. Your father and I wanted you to have easier lives than we did, she explained. But maybe we made things too easy. We wanted to give you everything. And somehow that's translated into you feeling entitled to everything, including my autonomy. That's not fair, James protested. We were trying to help. Were you? Catherine asked quietly. Or were you helping yourselves to what you see as your inheritance? Michael stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're your children. Of course we're going to inherit your estate eventually. That's how families work. We were just trying to make sure it's properly managed in the meantime. By you, Catherine pointed out. Managed by you, for your eventual benefit, without any consideration for what I might want to do with the second half of my life. The second half? James scoffed. Mom, be realistic. You're nearly 60. Your grandmother lived to be 97, Catherine reminded him. By that math, I'm barely past the halfway mark. The conversation circled without resolution. Catherine realized with a mixture of sadness and determination that her sons truly couldn't see beyond their own interests. They viewed her as an extension of themselves, a repository of resources that would eventually flow to them by natural right. The idea that she might have her own dreams, separate from their expectations, was incomprehensible to them. I have something for each of you, she said finally, reaching for 2 small boxes on the mantelpiece. Michael opened his first. Inside was his father's pocket watch, passed down through 3 generations. James found his father's chess set, the one Edward had used to teach him the game when he was 7. These are yours, regardless of anything else that happens, Catherine said. I'm not writing you out of my life. I'm just insisting that you respect the life I choose to live. After they left, Catherine stood in the half-empty house, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Grief for the family relationships that had become so distorted. Anxiety about the enormous changes ahead. But underlying it all, a growing sense of freedom and possibility. In 1 week, she would board a plane and begin again. That night, she dreamed of Edward. They were walking together along the Arno River in Florence, the setting sun turning the water to molten gold. He held her hand, his face creased in that familiar smile. You're doing the right thing, Cat, he said, using his old nickname for her. How can you be sure? She asked. Because I know you, he replied simply. And because you're smiling, really smiling, for the first time since I left. She woke with tears on her cheeks but certainty in her heart. The path forward was clear now, illuminated by morning sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. 1 week to go. The morning of her departure arrived with an unseasonable chill. Catherine woke before dawn, her body tense with anticipation. Sleep had been elusive, her mind racing through checklists and second thoughts throughout the night. She made herself a final cup of coffee in the nearly empty kitchen, wrapping her hands around the warm mug as she had done thousands of mornings before. The house echoed with emptiness now, most of her possessions either sold, donated, or packed into the 2 shipping containers currently making their way across the Atlantic. Catherine walked through each room one last time, her footsteps echoing on the bare floors. In the master bedroom, she paused by the window where she and Edward had stood, watching snowfall on countless winter mornings. In James's old room, she remembered the glow-in-the-dark stars they had painstakingly arranged on the ceiling when he was 8, fascinated by astronomy. In Michael's room, she recalled the hours spent helping him build elaborate model airplanes that once hung from fishing line on the ceiling. "So many memories," she whispered to the empty house. "But I can't live in memories forever." At 6:30, headlights swept across the living room wall as Maggie's car pulled into the driveway. Catherine took a deep breath, picked up her 2 suitcases, all that remained of her possessions until the shipping containers arrived in Italy, and walked out the front door without looking back. "Ready for the great adventure?" Maggie asked, as she helped load the luggage into her trunk. "As ready as I'll ever be," Catherine replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The drive to the airport passed in comfortable silence. Catherine watched familiar landmarks slide past her window. The park where she'd pushed the boys on swings, the high school they'd attended, the restaurant where she and Edward had celebrated their 30th anniversary. Each sight triggered a cascade of memories. But instead of the sharp pain she'd felt in the months after Edward's death, she now experienced a gentle melancholy, like the final notes of a beloved symphony. "I'll miss you terribly," Maggie said as they approached the airport terminal. "Promise you'll video call at least once a week." "I promise." Catherine squeezed her friend's hand. "And you'll visit at Christmas?" "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." Maggie pulled into the departure lane. "Though I'm still not sure how I'll explain to everyone where you've gone. Michael called me 3 times yesterday." Catherine's expression hardened slightly. "Tell him the truth, that I've moved to Italy. He doesn't need my address or phone number until he can demonstrate that he cares about me, not just my money." They embraced at the curb, both fighting tears. "Be magnificent," Maggie whispered fiercely in her ear. "Show those boys what their mother is really made of." Inside the terminal, Catherine checked her luggage and made her way to security. Her passport and boarding pass clutched tightly in her hand. As she waited in line, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. "James." She hesitated, then answered. "Hello, James." "Mom." His voice sounded strained. "Are you really leaving today?" "Yes. I'm at the airport now." A pause. "I still think this is a mistake." Catherine sighed. "I know you do, but it's my mistake to make, if that's what it turns out to be. Michael wanted to freeze your accounts. Did you know that? He talked to a lawyer about having you declared incompetent." A chill ran through her. "And what did you say to that?" Another, longer pause. "I told him it was going too far. That's why I'm calling, I guess. To say, I don't agree with what you're doing, but I respect that it's your choice." Catherine felt a small warmth bloom in her chest. Perhaps there was hope for James after all. "Thank you. That means a lot to me. Will you at least tell me where in Florence you'll be living, in case of emergency?" The warmth cooled. There it was, the attempt to regain access, control. "I've left all the necessary emergency information with Maggie. If there's ever a genuine need, she can reach me." "Right." His voice turned bitter again. "You trust Maggie, but not your own sons. James, trust has to be earned back. I hope someday. Have a safe flight, Mom." He hung up. Catherine stared at the phone for a long moment, then turned it off and slipped it into her purse. Security, then a 12-hour flight, then a new life, one step at a time. The journey passed in a blur of security checkpoints, crowded terminals, and the muffled roar of jet engines. Catherine barely touched the airline meals, her stomach knotted with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. She tried to sleep, but managed only brief, restless naps, her mind continually cycling through doubts and fears. What if the apartment wasn't as advertised? What if her limited Italian wasn't enough to get by? What if she became ill in a foreign country with no family nearby? "You're being ridiculous," she told herself firmly. "People move countries all the time. You've planned for every contingency." Still, as the plane began its descent into Florence, her heart hammered against her ribs. Through the small window, she caught glimpses of the red-tiled roofs and ancient stone buildings that defined the city's historic center. Somewhere down there was her new home, a place she had visited only through virtual tours and photographs. Customs and immigration went more smoothly than she had feared. Her paperwork was in order, her residency permit application properly filed. Outside the secure area, she spotted a man in a dark suit, holding a sign with her name. The car service, another detail arranged weeks in advance. "Signora Foster?" the driver confirmed, taking her luggage. "Benvenuta a Firenze." "Grazie," Catherine replied, one of the few Italian words she felt confident pronouncing correctly. The drive from the airport to her apartment in the Oltrarno district provided Catherine with her first real glimpse of her new home city. They crossed the Arno River, its waters gleaming in the late afternoon sunlight, and wound through narrow medieval streets barely wide enough for the car. Catherine's eyes widened at the centuries-old buildings, the small shops with their colorful awnings, and the locals going about their evening routines, so different from the wide suburban streets she had left behind. "Here we are, Signora," the driver announced, pulling up outside a 4-story stone building with green shutters and window boxes spilling over with geraniums. "Via dei Serradli, numero 42. Catherine paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk with her luggage, staring up at the building. This was it, the leap of faith. She took a deep breath and approached the heavy wooden door, punching in the entry code she had memorized. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. Catherine eyed the narrow staircase with trepidation, but the driver had already disappeared with his tip. One step at a time, she told herself again, and began the climb. By the time she reached her door, she was breathing heavily, her legs protesting the unaccustomed exercise after hours of sitting on the plane. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and Catherine stepped into her new home for the first time. The reality matched the photographs almost perfectly. Wooden beams crossed the ceiling above terracotta tile floors. Light streamed through tall windows overlooking the street below. The furniture, a mix of antique and modern pieces she had purchased along with the apartment, waited exactly as arranged in the photos. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the dining table beside a welcome note from the property manager. Catherine walked slowly through each room, trailing her fingers over surfaces, opening cabinets, testing the firmness of the mattress in the bedroom. It was smaller than her house in the States, but still generous for one person. The second bedroom would serve as her office and guest room for when Maggie visited. Finally, she stepped out onto the small terrace. The sun was setting behind the hills beyond the city, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. Church bells rang in the distance. On the street below, locals strolled arm in arm, heading home or out to dinner. The scent of garlic and tomatoes wafted up from a nearby restaurant. "We made it, Edward," she whispered, imagining him standing beside her. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered." Exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed her. The time difference, the emotional strain of the past weeks, the physical exertion of travel, it all crashed down at once. Catherine barely managed to unpack her toiletries and change into pajamas before collapsing onto the bed. Despite her racing thoughts, sleep claimed her almost instantly. She woke disoriented, the unfamiliar ceiling above her causing a moment of panic before memory returned. Italy, Florence, her new home. Sunlight streamed through windows she had forgotten to cover with the shutters. The clock beside the bed read 10:15. She had slept for nearly 12 hours. Catherine rose and made her way to the small kitchen, where she found the coffee and simple provisions the property manager had stocked for her arrival. The coffee maker was different from her machine at home, but she figured it out after some trial and error. That first sip of strong Italian coffee on her terrace, overlooking the awakening city, felt like a victory. Small, but significant. "Day 1, she murmured to herself. "Let's see what you bring." The first week passed in a blur of practical matters. Catherine located the nearest grocery store, pharmacy, and bank. She figured out the bus system with the help of a patient ticket seller who spoke enough English to guide her. She attended her first Italian language class, where she met other expatriates in various stages of settling into Florentine life. Among them was Eleanor, a 72-year-old retired literature professor from Boston who had moved to Florence 5 years earlier after her husband's death. "Best decision I ever made," Eleanor told Catherine over coffee after class. "My children thought I was having a crisis at first. Now they visit every summer and marvel at how much younger I seem. My sons think I've lost my mind," Catherine confessed. "They tried to have me declared incompetent." Eleanor laughed, a rich, throaty sound. "Join the club, dear. My son-in-law is a psychiatrist. He actually suggested medication when I announced my move. Now, he asks me for restaurant recommendations for his patients traveling to Italy." Catherine found herself relaxing in Eleanor's company. The older woman had navigated exactly the path Catherine was now beginning. Her confidence and evident happiness offered living proof that such a dramatic life change could succeed. "The hardest part is the first 3 months," Eleanor advised. "You'll question your decision daily. You'll miss familiar comforts. You'll get frustrated with the language barrier and Italian bureaucracy. Push through it. By month 4, you'll start to find your rhythm." By the end of the second week, Catherine had established the beginnings of a routine. Mornings began with coffee on her terrace, followed by Italian language study. Afternoons were for exploring her neighborhood, running errands, or attending her language class. Evenings often found her at a small restaurant around the corner, where the owner, Marco, had taken a grandfatherly interest in the American widow, making sure she always had the freshest specials and a good table. At night, she video-called Maggie, sharing the day's discoveries and challenges. Maggie provided updates from home. Most importantly, that Michael had indeed consulted a lawyer about challenging Catherine's competency, but without access to her recent medical evaluations and with her assets already moved, he had no case. "He's furious," Maggie reported. "James less so. He called me yesterday asking if you were settling in okay." "That's something at least," Catherine sighed. Despite everything, she missed her sons. Or rather, she missed the relationship she wished they had, the one she had imagined all those years as she raised them. The third week brought the arrival of her shipping containers. Catherine spent days unpacking the items she had deemed essential enough to bring across an ocean. Edward's favorite reading chair, family photo albums, her collection of cookbooks, the quilt her grandmother had made for her wedding. With these familiar objects arranged around her, the apartment began to feel truly like home, a blend of her past life and her new beginning. That same week, she opened an Italian bank account and transferred a portion of her cryptocurrency holdings back into traditional currency, enough to live comfortably for several years, but not so much that Michael or James could trace or access it. The cold wallet containing the bulk of her assets remained secure, password protected with a phrase only she would know. Edward Florence, Sunset 1988, a reference to their honeymoon that no one else would guess. On the 1-month anniversary of her arrival, Catherine celebrated with a small indulgence, a ticket to the Uffizi Gallery, home to some of the world's greatest Renaissance masterpieces. As she stood before Botticelli's Birth of Venus, marveling at its beauty preserved across centuries, a thought struck her with surprising force. "I'm really doing this. I'm really living." For the first time since Edward's death, Catherine felt fully present in her own life, author of her own story. The grief remained, a quiet ache beneath her daily activities, but it no longer defined her. Florence was working its ancient magic, reminding her that life continued, that beauty persisted, that new chapters could begin at any age. That evening, she wrote a postcard to each of her sons, the first communication since her departure. She chose her words carefully, sharing small details of her new life without revealing her exact location. An olive branch, extended cautiously. Whether they would grasp it remained to be seen. 3 months passed, like pages turning in a well-loved book. Catherine's Italian improved from halting phrases to simple conversations. She could now order in restaurants without resorting to English, ask directions when lost in the labyrinthine streets of Florence's historic center, and exchange pleasantries with the elderly couple who lived across the hall. Each small linguistic victory felt monumental. The city had begun to feel familiar, Catherine knew which bakery made the best morning pastries, which market stalls offered the freshest produce, and which narrow streets provided shady shortcuts during the increasingly warm afternoons of late spring. She had mapped out favorite walking routes along the Arno River and discovered quiet gardens hidden behind ancient walls where she could sit and read for hours. Her apartment had transformed from a carefully arranged collection of possessions into a true home. Herbs grew in pots on her terrace: basil, rosemary, thyme, their scent releasing whenever she brushed against them. Local artwork adorned walls that had initially seemed foreign and imposing. The bedroom that had once felt strange now cradled her through nights of increasingly restful sleep. Most significantly, Catherine had begun to build a community. Her circle of acquaintances expanded beyond Eleanor to include other expatriates from her language class: Thomas, a retired architect from Chicago; Marianne, a French widow who had moved to Italy after losing her husband to cancer; and Luis, a Spanish writer working on a historical novel set in Renaissance Florence. They formed an informal support network, meeting for coffee after class and occasionally gathering for dinner at each other's apartments. Catherine had also formed tentative friendships with several Italians. Marco, the restaurant owner, introduced her to his wife and daughters. Sophia, who owned the small art gallery on the corner, began inviting Catherine to exhibition openings. Slowly, the initial loneliness that had sometimes threatened to overwhelm her during those first weeks subsided. On a warm June morning, Catherine sat on her terrace with her laptop, preparing for her weekly video call with Maggie. The connection stabilized, and her friend's familiar face appeared on screen, slightly pixelated but unmistakably concerned. "What's wrong?" Catherine asked immediately. "You look worried." Maggie sighed. "Michael came to see me yesterday. He was asking a lot of questions about you. Where exactly you're living, whether you're really okay financially, if you've mentioned coming back." Catherine's hand tightened around her coffee cup. "What did you tell him?" "Only what you've authorized, that you're in Florence, that you're doing well, and that you'll contact them when you're ready." Maggie hesitated. "But Kat, he seemed different this time. Less angry, more, I don't know, subdued. Did he mention anything about legal action? Or my mental state?" "No, nothing like that. He actually brought Rebecca and their little boy." Catherine's breath caught. "Their what? Oh God, you didn't know." Maggie's expression crumpled. "I'm so sorry. I thought surely they would have told you. Rebecca had a baby 3 weeks ago. A boy. They named him Edward." The world seemed to tilt sideways. A grandson, named after Edward. And no one had told her. "Catherine, are you okay?" She couldn't speak for a moment, her throat constricted with emotion. When she finally found her voice, it emerged as a whisper. "They didn't tell me. My first grandchild. And they didn't even tell me. I'm so sorry," Maggie repeated. "I assumed they would have at least emailed you." Catherine stood abruptly, needing to move, to process this revelation. She paced the small terrace, her mind racing. A grandson, the continuation of Edward's family line, carrying his name. And she was 3,000 miles away, a stranger to this new life. "Did they bring pictures?" she asked finally. "Yes. He's beautiful, Kat. Dark hair like Michael, but I think he has your eyes." Maggie paused. "Michael said something about sending you photos, but he didn't have your current email. I gave it to him. I hope that was okay." Catherine nodded, still struggling to absorb the news. "Yes, of course. Thank you." The remainder of their conversation passed in a blur. After disconnecting, Catherine sat motionless on the terrace, watching shadows shift across the terracotta rooftops as clouds drifted overhead. Her emotions cycled rapidly between joy at the existence of this new family member, hurt at being excluded from such momentous news, and a creeping doubt about her decision to distance herself so completely. Had she been too harsh? Too absolute in her judgment? The questions haunted her throughout the day as she went mechanically through her routine: language study, errands, and afternoon coffee at her usual cafe. She found herself unable to focus, her mind constantly returning to the image of a tiny boy with Edward's name, whom she had never seen. That evening, she checked her email obsessively. Nothing from Michael. The hurt deepened, calcifying into a hard knot beneath her ribs. She picked up her phone twice to call him, then set it down again, remembering the coldness in his voice during their last conversation, his attempts to control her finances, his threats of legal action. Just before midnight, the email notification she'd been waiting for finally appeared. From Michael. The subject line read simply, "Your grandson." Catherine's hand trembled as she opened it. The message was brief, almost clinical. "Mom, Rebecca gave birth to Edward James Foster on May 12th, 7 pounds, 6 ounces, 21 inches long. Mother and baby doing well. Attached are some photos. Michael, no warmth, no invitation to connect or visit. Just the bare facts and 5 photographs of a tiny, perfect face framed by a blue hospital blanket. Catherine studied each image with desperate attention, searching for traces of Edward, of her sons as babies, of herself. The dark hair was definitely Michael's, but there, the shape of the eyes, the slight dimple in the chin, those were Edward's features, preserved in this new generation. Tears flowed freely now, dropping onto the screen of her tablet. She wanted to reach through the device and touch that soft cheek, to hold this small continuation of her family's story. The distance she had carefully constructed between herself and her sons suddenly felt like an unbearable chasm. Catherine composed and deleted 3 different replies before settling on, "Michael, thank you for sharing these beautiful photos. Edward is perfect. I can see both you and your father in him. Please give my love to Rebecca, and congratulations on becoming parents. This is wonderful news. I would love to arrange a video call to see the baby properly when you're ready. Let me know what might work with your schedule. Love, Mom." She hesitated over the love signature, wondering if it was presumptuous after all that had happened, but left it. Whatever their conflicts, she did love her sons. That had never changed. Sleep eluded her that night. Catherine lay awake, remembering the births of her own children. Michael's difficult delivery after 30 hours of labor, James's surprisingly quick arrival 4 years later. She recalled Edward's face, transformed with wonder as he held each son for the first time. "Look what we made, Cat," he had whispered, awestruck. By morning, Michael had not replied. Catherine tried to push aside her disappointment as she prepared for her Italian lesson. Perhaps he was busy with the new baby. Perhaps Rebecca was struggling with postpartum recovery. Perhaps they simply needed time to consider her request for a video call. Or perhaps, a small voice whispered, they have no intention of allowing you into their child's life. 3 days passed with no response. Catherine found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on her daily activities. The joy she had cultivated in her new life seemed dimmed, overshadowed by this reminder of all she had left behind. She considered booking a flight back to the States, making an unannounced visit, forcing a reconciliation. But the thought of returning to the scene of so much conflict filled her with dread. On the 4th day, she confided in Eleanor during their weekly lunch. "You're a grandmother several times over," Catherine said. "How do you manage the distance?" Eleanor considered the question, twirling pasta around her fork. "With great difficulty, especially at first. My daughter was still angry about my move when her first child was born. She withheld photos, updates, everything, trying to punish me, I think. What changed? Time, consistency. I kept sending gifts for the baby, kept expressing interest without pressure, and I lived my life here with such evident joy that eventually curiosity overcame her resentment. She visited when Emily was 8 months old. Eleanor smiled at the memory. Now they come every summer. The grandchildren love having nonna in Italia. It's become their special adventure. But you missed those first months. Yes? Eleanor's expression grew somber. That time is gone forever. I mourn it still, but I've gained so much in exchange, not just for myself, but for them too. My grandchildren have a worldview many American children lack. They're growing up knowing there are different ways to live, different languages, different foods, different values. Oh, Catherine absorbed this perspective, finding both comfort and challenge in it. I'm not sure I'm as patient as you were. Patience isn't really a choice when it comes to adult children, Eleanor said wryly. They hold all the cards when grandchildren are involved. We can only wait, loving them from whatever distance they impose until they're ready to bridge the gap. That evening, Catherine received another email, not from Michael, but from James. Her younger son's message carried a different tone. Hi, Mom. I don't know if Michael told you, but Rebecca had the baby. They named him after Dad. He's pretty cute. I'm attaching some pictures I took when I visited last weekend. I know things are complicated between all of us right now, but I thought you should know that I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I didn't handle things well. Neither did Michael. I'm not saying we were entirely wrong to be concerned about your sudden changes, but we should have listened more and dictated less. How are you doing in Florence? Is it everything you hoped? Let me know if you're open to a call sometime. James Catherine stared at the message, reading it 3 times to be sure she wasn't projecting her own wishes onto his words. There was an openness here, a tentative reaching out that had been absent in Michael's communication. James had always been the more reflective of her 2 sons, less immediately reactive than his brother, more willing to reconsider his positions. The attached photos showed baby Edward from different angles than Michael's formal portraits. There was one of the infant sleeping on James's chest, another of tiny fingers wrapped around what must be Michael's index finger. These casual, intimate images affected Catherine even more deeply than the earlier ones. She replied immediately, Dear James, thank you so much for these beautiful photos and for reaching out. Yes, Michael did send me some pictures, but these candid ones are especially precious. I can hardly believe I'm a grandmother. Florence is wonderful, challenging in many ways, but also deeply rewarding. I'm learning Italian, slowly, making friends, and exploring the city. Some days are harder than others, of course. I miss familiar things, familiar people. I miss you and Michael, despite everything. I would love to talk. I'm usually free in the evenings my time, which would be early afternoon for you. Let me know what works. Love, Mom P.S. I've attached a few photos of my apartment and neighborhood so you can see where I'm living now. Catherine selected several images that showed her new home. The view from her terrace, her living room with Edward's reading chair prominently placed, the cobblestone street outside her building, and a selfie she had taken in front of the Duomo. She hesitated over including the last one, concerned it might seem like she was flaunting her new life, but decided honesty was important. This was her reality now, neither better nor worse than her previous existence, simply different. James replied the next day, suggesting a video call on Saturday. Catherine agreed immediately, both excited and apprehensive about this first real-time conversation with either of her sons since her departure. The exchange felt like a tiny crack in a dam, a small opening through which reconciliation might eventually flow. When Saturday arrived, Catherine prepared for the call with the same nervous energy she might have invested in an important job interview. She chose her outfit carefully, applied light makeup, and positioned her laptop on the dining table where the lighting was most flattering, and the background showed her tastefully decorated living room. At the appointed time, her screen illuminated with James's familiar face. The sight of her younger son, his dark hair needing a trim, the same small worry line between his eyebrows that Edward had developed in his 30s, brought a rush of emotion Catherine hadn't fully anticipated. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice slightly distorted by the connection. "Can you hear me okay?" "Yes, perfectly." Catherine smiled, drinking in the sight of him. "It's so good to see you, James." Their initial conversation was awkward, halting. They discussed safe topics, the weather in their respective locations, Catherine's Italian classes, James's work projects. Gradually, the rhythm of their exchange grew more natural, more reminiscent of their relationship before the conflict. "The apartment looks great," James commented, glancing at what he could see of her surroundings. "Very European." "It feels like home now," Catherine said. "Different from the house, of course, but right for this chapter of my life." James nodded, then seemed to gather his courage. "Mom, I need to apologize. The way Michael and I handled everything, it wasn't right. We treated you like you couldn't make your own decisions." The simple acknowledgement, offered without qualification or excuse, loosened something that had been tightly wound inside Catherine's chest. "Thank you for saying that. It means a great deal to me. I still don't fully understand why you felt you had to leave so completely. To convert everything to cryptocurrency and move to another continent. It seemed so extreme." Catherine considered her response carefully. "It was extreme," she admitted, "but I felt cornered. You and Michael had already planned every aspect of my future without consulting me. You'd chosen a living facility, talked to realtors about my house, prepared power of attorney documents. What would you have done in my position?" James winced. "When you put it that way, I guess I see your point." The conversation continued, delving deeper into the events that had led to their estrangement. For the first time, Catherine felt James was truly listening to her perspective, rather than dismissing it as the irrational reaction of a grieving widow. Progress, however tentative, was being made. "What about the baby?" Catherine asked eventually. "How is little Edward doing? And Rebecca?" James's expression brightened. "They're good. The baby's gaining weight like a champion. Rebecca's exhausted, of course. Michael's trying to help, but you know how he is. Not exactly a natural with the emotional support." "And have you thought about children?" Catherine asked gently. "You and Diane?" A shadow crossed James's face. "We've been trying. No luck so far. Some fertility issues we're working through." "I'm sorry to hear that." Catherine hesitated, then added, "I hope it works out for you both." They talked for nearly 2 hours, longer than either had anticipated. As they prepared to end the call, James asked tentatively, "Would it be okay if we did this again? Maybe make it a regular thing?" Catherine felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. "I'd like that very much." "And Mom? I haven't told Michael we're talking. He's still processing everything. But I think given some time, he might come around too." Catherine nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "One step at a time," she said. "That's how I've been approaching everything since I got here. One step at a time." After disconnecting, Catherine sat quietly, absorbing what had just occurred. The conversation had been far from perfect, with many difficult topics still unaddressed, but it represented genuine progress. A door had been opened. The possibility of reconciliation, however distant, now existed, where before there had been only silence. That night, Catherine dreamed of Edward again. This time, they were sitting on her terrace in Florence, watching the sunset together. "They named the baby after you," she told him in the dream. Edward smiled. "I know. And eventually, you'll hold him. Just be patient, Cat. Some journeys take longer than others." She woke with tears on her pillow, but peace in her heart. The path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time since learning of her grandson's birth, Catherine felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would continue building her new life in Florence, while gently, patiently working to repair the damaged connections to her old one. Some journeys indeed took longer than others, but they were no less worth undertaking. Autumn painted Florence in rich, burnished hues. 6 months had passed since Catherine's arrival, transforming her from anxious newcomer to confident resident. She navigated the cobblestone streets with familiar ease, greeted shopkeepers by name, and conducted increasingly complex conversations in Italian that now flowed more naturally from her lips. The weekly video calls with James had become a cherished anchor in her routine. Their conversations had deepened beyond surface pleasantries to meaningful exchanges about their lives. their grief over Edward's death, and their hopes for the future. James had begun sharing more about his fertility struggles with Diane, finding in his mother a compassionate confidant rather than the controlling figure he had once resented. "The doctor says our best option is IVF," he explained during their most recent call. "But it's expensive, and insurance only covers part of it." Catherine had listened thoughtfully. "I might be able to help with that," she offered carefully, aware of the complex dynamics around money that had contributed to their estrangement. James had hesitated. "That's generous, Mom, but after everything that happened with the inheritance issues, this would be different," Catherine explained. "Not an advance on any inheritance, but a gift from a grandmother who wants to help create her grandchild. Think about it. No pressure." The conversation marked a significant evolution in their relationship. 6 months earlier, any mention of financial assistance would have ignited suspicion and resentment. Now it could be discussed as a possibility, even if James remained cautious. Michael, however, remained distant. Through James, Catherine received occasional updates and photos of baby Edward, who had grown from a wrinkled newborn into a chubby, smiling infant with Edward's deep dimples and curious eyes. She printed these photos and created a small gallery on her bedroom wall, speaking to the images as if the child could hear her voice across the ocean. "Your grandfather would have adored you," she told the smiling face in the most recent picture. He had the same expression when he was particularly pleased with something, that half smile with the right eyebrow slightly raised. October brought an unexpected development. Catherine received an email from Rebecca, her first direct communication since the confrontation that had precipitated Catherine's departure. "Catherine, I hope this message finds you well. James mentioned you two have been talking regularly, and he showed me photos of your apartment in Florence. It looks lovely. Edward is 5 months old now. He's starting to develop quite a personality, stubborn like his father, but with a ready smile for everyone he meets. The pediatrician says he's advanced for his age, already trying to roll over and grab things. Michael doesn't know I'm writing to you. He's still hurt and angry, though he rarely talks about it anymore. But I've been thinking a lot about family lately, now that I'm a mother myself. Edward should know his grandmother. We're considering a trip to Italy next spring, when the baby is a bit older and can travel more easily. Would you be open to seeing us if we came to Florence? No pressure. Just an idea I've been considering." Rebecca Catherine read the message 3 times, her heart racing. The olive branch she had extended months ago was finally being reciprocated, not by Michael directly, but through Rebecca, an unexpected ally. She composed her reply carefully. "Dear Rebecca, thank you for reaching out. Your email brought tears to my eyes. Happy ones. I would be overjoyed to see you, Michael, and especially little Edward, if you visit Florence. My door is always open to you. Spring is beautiful here, April and May especially, when the gardens are in bloom and before the summer crowds arrive. Please know that despite all that happened, I have never stopped loving Michael or wanting to be part of his life, and now, his son's life. Some distances take time to bridge. With warm regards, Catherine," she sent the message, then immediately called Maggie to share the news. "That's wonderful," Maggie exclaimed. "Rebecca always struck me as the sensible one. And a trip to Italy? Perfect neutral ground for a reunion." "If it happens," Catherine cautioned, "Michael might veto the idea once he knows. Or he might surprise you," Maggie suggested. "Having a child changes people, makes them see their own parents differently." The possibility of this family visit became a bright point on Catherine's horizon, something to plan for and anticipate during the darker, colder days of approaching winter. She began researching child-friendly activities in Florence, restaurants that would accommodate an infant, and the best shops for baby gifts. November brought another unexpected communication, an email from Michael himself, brief and formal, but unmistakably a step toward reconciliation. "Mom, Rebecca told me about her email to you and your response. While I still have reservations about how things unfolded last year, I recognize that continuing this estrangement serves no one, least of all my son. If we proceed with the trip to Italy in the spring, I am willing to meet. Perhaps seeing each other in person will help us move forward in a more productive way. Michael. No mention of love, no warmth, but an opening nonetheless. Catherine replied with equal restraint, acknowledging his message and reaffirming her welcome. As winter descended on Florence, Catherine found herself drawn deeper into the local community. Her Italian had improved significantly, allowing her to participate more fully in neighborhood events and conversations. She joined a cooking class at a nearby cultural center, learning to make traditional Tuscan dishes from a formidable grandmother named Lucia, who corrected her technique with affectionate sternness. No, signora. You must feel the pasta dough with your fingertips, not just your eyes. Like this? Lucia would guide Catherine's hands, demonstrating the perfect consistency for handmade pappardelle or gnocchi. Through the cooking class, Catherine met Maria, a local teacher whose mother had recently died. The two women formed a bond that transcended their age difference and cultural backgrounds. Maria invited Catherine to Christmas dinner with her family. Her first Italian Christmas, spent in a crowded apartment with 3 generations sharing stories, food, and warmth. You are not alone here, Maria told her, as they washed dishes together after the meal. You have made yourself a new family. The words touched Catherine deeply. She had indeed created connections in this ancient city, not replacements for her sons or Edward, but additional threads in the tapestry of her life, enriching rather than replacing what had come before. Winter passed with surprising swiftness. Catherine established routines that carried her through the colder months. Morning Italian practice, afternoon walks even in inclement weather, evenings spent reading Edward's favorite books, or writing in the journal she had begun keeping. She documented her experiences, thoughts, and emotions, not just for herself, but as a legacy for her grandson and any future grandchildren who might someday wonder about this chapter of her life. February brought confirmation of the spring visit. Rebecca had booked flights and a hotel room for the first week of May. Catherine immediately began preparing for their arrival, mentally planning every detail to ensure the visit would foster healing rather than reopen old wounds. March arrived with unusually warm weather, coaxing early blossoms from the trees lining the Arno. Catherine's weekly calls with James continued, each conversation easier than the last. During one such call, he shared surprising news. Diane and I have started the IVF process, he said, a mixture of excitement and apprehension in his voice. We had our first consultation last week. That's wonderful, Catherine replied. How are you both feeling about it? Nervous, hopeful. James hesitated. Actually, we've been thinking about your offer to help. If you're still open to it, it would make a significant difference. Of course I am, Catherine said warmly. Just tell me what you need and how I can transfer the funds. James looked visibly relieved. Thank you, Mom. This means a lot to us. Family helps family, Catherine said simply. That's how it should be. The next day, Catherine transferred $30,000 from her cryptocurrency holdings to a traditional bank account, then wired it to James and Diane. The transaction was straightforward, businesslike, but represented something profound, a restoration of trust, a new foundation for their relationship. April unfurled in a riot of color and fragrance. Catherine's terrace garden bloomed with herbs and flowers. She spent hours preparing her apartment and planning itineraries for her family's visit, alternating between excited anticipation and nervous apprehension. Would Michael remain distant and formal? Would baby Edward accept her as a stranger, suddenly appearing in his life? Had too much damage been done to rebuild genuine connections? The night before their scheduled arrival, Catherine barely slept. She rose before dawn and stood on her terrace, watching the sun illuminate the dome of the Duomo in the distance. The city was quiet at this hour. still draped in the remnants of night, but with hints of the bustling day to come. "I wish you were here for this, Edward," she whispered to the morning air, "to see our family trying to heal." The meeting was arranged for noon at a small restaurant near Catherine's apartment. Neutral territory with excellent food and a high tolerance for infants. Catherine arrived early, securing a corner table with enough space for a baby carrier. She ordered a glass of Prosecco to calm her nerves, but couldn't bring herself to drink it, her stomach too knotted with anticipation. And then they were there, Rebecca pushing a stroller, Michael following with a diaper bag slung over his shoulder, both looking jet-lagged but alert. Catherine rose on unsteady legs, her heart pounding against her ribs. For a moment, they all stood frozen, the weight of history and hurt suspended between them. Then Rebecca stepped forward, breaking the spell. "Catherine," she said warmly, embracing her mother-in-law, "it's so good to see you." Michael remained where he was, his expression guarded but not hostile. "Mom," he acknowledged with a slight nod. Catherine barely registered their greetings. Her attention had fixed on the stroller and the small face peering out from beneath a blue sun hat. Edward James Foster, her grandson in the flesh, after months of knowing him only through photographs. His eyes, so like his grandfather's, regarded her with solemn curiosity. "May I?" she whispered, gesturing toward the baby. Rebecca nodded encouragingly. "Of course." Catherine knelt before the stroller, bringing herself to eye level with the infant. "Hello, Edward," she said softly. "I'm your grandmother." The baby stared at her for a long moment, then broke into a gummy smile that transformed his entire face. Without hesitation, he reached out a plump hand toward her pearl necklace, the same one she had worn to that fateful dinner over a year ago. "He loves grabbing jewelry," Rebecca explained, "especially pearls for some reason." Catherine unfastened her necklace and let the baby grasp one of the larger pearls, keeping careful watch to ensure he didn't put it in his mouth. "Your grandfather gave me these on our 20th anniversary," she told him. "Someday I'll tell you all about him." They settled at the table, ordering lunch and navigating the initial awkwardness of reunion. Rebecca carried most of the conversation, sharing stories of the baby's development and their first impressions of Florence. Michael remained reserved, watching the interaction between Catherine and his son with an unreadable expression. After the meal, Catherine suggested a walk to a nearby park. As they strolled through the sunlit streets, Michael finally spoke directly to his mother. "Your Italian seems good," he observed. "You've really settled in here." "I have," Catherine replied. "It's become home." "I still don't understand why you felt you had to leave like that. Without warning, converting everything to cryptocurrency." His voice held a hint of the old resentment. Catherine considered her response carefully, aware that this moment could either bridge their divide or widen it. "I felt cornered," she said finally. "You and James had made decisions about my life without consulting me. You were treating me as if I was already incompetent." "We were worried about you," Michael insisted. "Dad was gone. You were alone in that big house." "I know you believe that," Catherine acknowledged. "But Michael, you have to understand how it felt from my perspective. You weren't just suggesting options. You had already chosen a retirement community, spoken to realtors, prepared legal documents. You were planning to take control of the life and assets your father and I had built together." Michael fell silent, processing her words. The baby gurgled in his stroller, reaching for a passing butterfly. Catherine continued, "Perhaps I overreacted. Perhaps there were better ways to assert my independence. But I needed to show both of you and myself that I was still capable of making my own choices, of building a new life even at 58. 58 isn't old," Michael conceded, surprising her. "No, it isn't," Catherine agreed, "though I understand better now why you were concerned. Becoming a parent changes your perspective. You want to protect those you love." Michael glanced at his son, then back at Catherine. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes that reminded her powerfully of Edward. "Yes," he said quietly, It does. They reached the park and found a bench in the shade. Rebecca took the baby out of his stroller to stretch his legs, holding him upright as he practiced standing on wobbly legs. "Would you like to hold him?" she asked Catherine. Catherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Rebecca placed the baby in her arms, and Catherine felt the solid weight of him, the miraculous combination of generations, of DNA passed from Edward to Michael, to this new life. The baby regarded her solemnly for a moment, then reached up to pat her cheek with a damp hand. "He likes you," Rebecca smiled. "He's usually more cautious with strangers." "We're not strangers," Catherine whispered. "Not really. We just haven't met in person until now." Michael watched this interaction, his expression gradually softening. "He has Dad's dimple," he observed. "I noticed it the first time he really smiled." "And your determination," Catherine added. "Look at how focused he is." This simple exchange, 3 adults admiring a baby's traits, created a momentary harmony, a reminder of their fundamental connection despite all that had transpired. They were family, bound by blood and history, and this small continuation of their shared story. The next 6 days unfolded with increasing ease. Catherine introduced them to her favorite spots in Florence, proudly conversing in Italian with shopkeepers and waiters. She showed them her apartment, now fully transformed into a personal sanctuary that reflected both her past in America and her present in Italy. Michael gradually relaxed, his initial reserve melting under the combined influences of his son's obvious attachment to Catherine, Rebecca's gentle encouragement, and perhaps his own recognition that his mother had not only survived, but thrived in her new environment. On their final evening, as they shared a farewell dinner on Catherine's terrace, he finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I owe you an apology," he said, setting down his wine glass. "James and we handled everything badly after Dad died. We thought we were protecting you, but we were really just trying to control the situation. Control you." Catherine reached across the table and took his hand, the first physical contact they had initiated since her departure. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." "I'm still not entirely comfortable with how you responded," Michael admitted, "but seeing you here, how you've built this new life, I understand it better now. And I understand why you were concerned," Catherine replied. "We all acted out of love, in our own imperfect ways." Rebecca, who had been quietly listening while holding the sleeping baby, spoke up. "So, where do we go from here?" Catherine smiled at her daughter-in-law, grateful for the practical question that moved them from past hurts to future possibilities. "I'd like regular video calls with all of you, like I have with James. And perhaps visits. You coming here, me coming there, a couple times a year." "I'd like that too," Michael said, surprising her with his readiness to agree. Edward should know his grandmother. "And his Italian heritage," Rebecca added with a smile, "even if it's adopted rather than genetic." They laughed together, the sound drifting up into the star-filled Florentine night. Catherine felt something shift and settle within her. Not an ending to all the complexity between them, but a beginning of something new and potentially beautiful. The morning of their departure arrived too quickly. At the taxi that would take them to the airport, Catherine embraced Rebecca warmly, then bent to kiss her grandson's forehead. "Grow strong and curious, little one," she whispered. "I'll see you again soon." Finally, she turned to Michael. For a moment, they regarded each other uncertainly, 18 months of hurt and misunderstanding hanging between them. Then Michael stepped forward and embraced her. A brief, slightly awkward hug, but genuine. "Take care, Mom," he said. "We'll call when we're home." "I'd like that," Catherine replied, her voice steady despite the emotions swelling in her chest. She stood on the sidewalk, waving as the taxi pulled away, watching until it disappeared around a corner. Then she turned and walked slowly back to her apartment, her steps lighter than they had been in months. On her terrace, Catherine picked up the journal she had been keeping and opened to a fresh page. She began to write, "May 7th, 2025. Today marks a new beginning. Not a complete resolution, those rarely exist in real families, but a genuine start toward healing. I held my grandson for the first time. I saw my son smile at me again. We ate together, walked together, talked honestly together. Small miracles, all. Edward would be proud of us. He always believed in second chances, in the possibility of repair even after terrible breaks. Nothing is ever truly lost, he used to say, unless you stop looking for it. I've found my way here in Florence, a life I never imagined, but now cannot imagine living without. And now, perhaps, I'm finding my way back to being a mother and grandmother too, in new forms that honor both who I was and who I've become. The story continues. Not the ending I expected when I boarded that plane 18 months ago, but maybe a better one than I could have written alone. Catherine closed the journal and looked out over the ancient city that had become her home. Church bells rang in the distance, marking the hour. On the street below, locals and tourists mingled in the spring sunshine. Life flowed around and through her, vital and unpredictable and beautiful. In her pocket, her phone chimed with an incoming message. A photo from Rebecca, Michael holding the baby at the airport gate, both smiling at the camera. The caption read simply, "Until next time." Catherine smiled, saving the image to the growing collection of family photographs. The distance between them, both physical and emotional, remained. But bridges were being built, slowly, deliberately, with care and intention. She had taken a risk, leaving everything behind to reclaim her autonomy. The journey had been difficult, lonely at times, exhilarating at others. But standing here now, with the sun warming her face and new possibilities unfolding before her, Catherine knew with absolute certainty it had been worth it. Not an ending, but a continuation. Not a separation, but a reconfiguration. Family reimagined, on new and more equal terms. At 59, Catherine Foster had discovered something profound, that sometimes the bravest thing isn't holding on, but letting go just enough to allow something better to take shape. Edward had been right all along. Nothing was ever truly lost, unless you stopped looking for it. And Catherine would never stop looking for ways to love her family, even across oceans, even through hurt, even when the path forward wasn't clear. That, after all, was what second chances were for. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.